All right. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar that we'll be presenting. The topic for today's session is going to be featuring monetizing your embedded analytics capabilities within your SaaS applications. Just to kind of kick things off with a bit of an introduction, my name is David Abramson. I'm the CTO here at Qrvey, and on the webinar, helping me present this topic, I'm joined by Natan Cohen, who leads up our customer success team here at Qrvey as well. And to sort of give you a bit of an introduction to what we're going to be focusing on for the presentation this afternoon, I'm going to start just with a brief introduction into who Qrvey is, and then we'll jump right into the topic of the monetization, but we'll sort of frame it around what embedded analytics can look like for your SaaS applications. So for those of you who aren't aware, here at Qrvey, we provide embedded analytics for SaaS applications. We work every day with SaaS companies and product teams to help them not only accelerate their analytic roadmaps, but also deliver an extremely rich set of analytical capabilities as part of their overall SaaS offering. So I think it's important to first kind of set the table stakes for what we're discussing around analytics. So it's helpful to understand what kind of a successful analytics layer ends up looking like as part of your SaaS applications or product offerings. And we'll touch on some of those key functional areas and some of the examples of how that can be rolled out as part of a overall SaaS solution and strategy. And then kind of the second part of what we're going to be focusing on today in the discussion is that monetization topic, or those opportunities that exist. And so we'll look at some different strategies for helping you monetize your embedded analytics capabilities within your products. This will look at several different areas, which might include combination of monetizing specific features, different modules, or even different use cases that might help you serve different users or markets within your product offering or product implementations. So I think in order to kind of kick things off, we'll start with that focus on what embedded analytics can look like. And so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here, Natan, to sort of walk you through some of the different strategies for launching your embedded analytics capabilities in your SaaS products.
Sure. Well, thanks, David. One of the things that I learned from our own customers actually is that the journey to embedded analytics going to production, it's not a monolithic journey. And it's certainly not a 6 to 12 month journey where you don't see anything and nothing can go to production until a year later. It's actually multifaceted with lots of production drops. And so I looked at what a lot of our customers were doing with their deployments, and I broke it down into 5 key events. There are certainly more in the future, but these were the first 5 most common. And the first was a targeted POC. So this is a demo that you can build for your current customers to whet their appetite about what's to come, get them excited. And it's also a good sales tool for your sales team to start demoing. And next is what we call the interactive data views. So this is not necessarily a report or a dashboard with specific visualizations. This is simply, kind of a tabular view on your actual data, but it's interactive. So that means that users can move columns around, they can filter, they can sort, they can aggregate, they can create new columns of data and really explore the data set and get accustomed to it, which would lead to the next drop, which is typically what most of our customers would make an announcement for their own customer base for, and that's the customizable managed dashboards. So maybe for about a month, customers have already gotten a taste for what the data is and how they can slice and dice it. They know the data sets, they're familiar with it. And now what you're doing is you're giving them some pre-built managed dashboards that the SaaS organization has built, and they have some light customization capabilities. So maybe you can allow users to rearrange charts, remove charts, or add pre-built charts. But typically, that's the extent to which they can customize those dashboards. And then next drop after that, this might actually be what you might call your full MVP release. And this is what we would call self-service analytics. So to be clear, that means that your customers and users can now create, modify, delete, share dashboards and visualizations that they create from scratch. So it's quite a meaningful release at that point. And then from there, you might have a future release that focuses on custom data alerts and thresholds that notify users via text message, email, or Slack. And you might allow users to start subscribing to reports so that they can receive a PDF of the dashboard at 9 a.m. every Monday, for example. And there are certainly future releases beyond that. And ultimately it extends far into the future, but these are typically the first 5 meaningful stages and your path to your return on investment. So I'm going to pass it back to David now.
Yeah, so great. Thanks, Natan. I think now that we understand a little bit more about what we're talking about for embedded analytics as a use case and the types of functional and sort of launch requirements and features, we can really dig into thinking about what are some of those effective strategies for building a monetization around those feature sets or use cases. So we've highlighted a couple different models here. And again, these are some of the ones that we see a lot of our customers working through and building out. So the first obviously is built around that freemium sort of concept where you may decide some of those capabilities, some of those features, maybe it's the baseline set of table stakes, analytic grids, or those types of components are going to be offered as a basic set of tools for free as part of your offering. But again, different models can support different monetization outcomes and use cases. Tiered pricing is also very effective when it comes to thinking about how you might be able to differentiate multiple different tiers of feature sets. This is also offers some scalability in terms of potentially offering different levels or pricing options based on either the features that you're launching into the solution or potentially some other gate like a number of users, data volumes, or similar usage limits that you might choose to build pricing around within your solution. And then there's also very popular kind of upsell strategies where you could offer the analytics layer as a completely separate module or maybe feature-based add-ons, which could be part of either its own add-on service or part of other premium services that you're choosing to build into your product as well. And then the last use case or strategy that we'll kind of highlight here maybe looks at a slightly different approach to monetizing or building custom packaging around analytics. And that could include monetizing some of the highly custom or even consulting driven services that you may choose to offer to your customers. So if you have services teams or folks that you want to build around more of like a custom consulting service to help your customers or users leverage analytics more effectively. Again, this is another strategy that we've seen being utilized by different customers when it comes to packaging and monetizing their analytics components as part of their overall software offering. So now that we understand a little bit more about the overall sort of analytic path and use cases, as well as some of the possible strategies for monetizing, I think it's also important to kind of think through what success ends up looking like. One of the things that I think we see being a very successful model is iteration. So the ability to not only launch those features, but also make sure that you provide a seamless user experience with continuous innovation and working with partners like Qrvey to help you deliver those type of product improvements and innovations as part of your overall software offering. but then sort of checking in at different intervals and periodic updates to ensure that the users are getting the value that they need out of the modules or features or other capabilities that you're launching. And then all of that kind of in a cycle helps you build a very successful overall monetization path and strategy. And so what we can do now is we can start looking at some of the more targeted case studies or success stories that we've seen implemented around monetizing embedded analytics. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Natan, and he's going to walk through a couple different examples, including some, actual real world implementations and what they learned and some of the outcomes that they saw when it came to building those strategies for monetizing the embedded analytics as part of their software SaaS solutions. So I'm going to pass it back to Natan, and he can take you through those.
Yeah, thanks so much, David. So yeah, as David mentioned, I do want to go through a real case study of two of our customers who've gone to production with embedded analytics. But I wanted to introduce two of the pricing models that they decided to use, as well as how they packaged their pricing and their features as a subscription tier. So the first model is volume-based pricing. There are a few ways to do it. So it's not just three. These are just three examples of ways to do it. You can do it based on data footprint, which would be the amount of data that your customers are bringing into your platform. You can also do it based on the number of lines of businesses that are using your tool. So this would be suitable for some of the larger organizations like the bigger enterprise customers. You could also do it based on the number of application integration touch points. So for example, if they're going to embed your platform within multiple product lines, that's also a way to establish your volume-based pricing. And the next model would be value-based pricing. So this is less concerned about how much of something you're bringing in or doing, and more concerned with what value am I getting from your software or your services. And again, these are just three examples of ways to do value-based pricing. The simplest way to do it is based on actual capabilities and features, right? And that's pretty simple to understand. The other way to do it is based on the actual type of organization, or perhaps the size of the organization. And you can also do it based on an organization's forecasted revenue. So for example, if you know that they plan to bring an extra $10 million of revenue that's directly tied to your platform, that would have more value than if they were only able to bring $1 million of extra revenue. So these are all examples of how you can do value-based pricing. And whichever pricing model you choose, we now live in a world of subscriptions. So that means that there's always pressure to continue to add value and justification for your core platform. And we find that a tiered subscription model tends to work well. And generally, 3 tiers or less, right? 2 to 3 tiers tend to work best. You could certainly have more than 3 tiers, but just keep in mind that you would have to enable your marketing team to describe those tiers to your customers. And you'd have to enable your sales team to learn the tiers and then be able to position them appropriately. So just keeping it to 2 to 3 tiers makes that simple. The first tier really ought to be your core value proposition, right? And it should never be the case that a customer feels like they're not getting anything substantive or anything of value in that first tier. So that's really your core value proposition. And next would be tier 2. And this could be an enhanced set of features and capabilities over and above what they get in tier 1. And next would be tier 3, which could be based on the amount of content that they're creating within your platform, or perhaps more volume based, right? And that's where scalability comes in. Maybe it's more users interacting with the system, or it could be bringing more data into the system, and that might be a meaningful third tier. So now that you understand the two types of models and the subscription tier, I'm going to focus on our first customer that decided to use the volume-based pricing model. And the way they determined the pricing bands is they decided to segment their customers based on the total employee count. And they figured that that would correlate with two things. Number of employees would correlate with the size of an organization, and it would also likely correlate with the amount of data to be analyzed in the platform. From their perspective, they're really counting on the analytics vendor, which would be us, to deliver more and more value over time. Because remember, this is, again, a subscription-based model, and their customers are going to be paying a premium for analytics. So next, after they determined the pricing model, they had to determine what the actual pricing strategy was going to be. So remember that they had a banded model, and they decided that the actual price should be based on the percent of the customer's total ARR. But rather than having total ARR different for every single customer, they took a look at the bands that they defined. They identified the largest total ARR within the band, and that became the price for the entire band. So it's actually quite smart, and it simplified the actual pricing strategy. In determining the price, they had to factor in platform hosting costs, the actual licensing costs with Qrvey, the onboarding and the maintenance cost. So that would cover onboarding their support team as well as their customer success team. And then their goal was to get about 2 to 3x the return on investment with the embedded analytics platform, roughly coming 1 year after their initial investment. So let's take a look at the subscription tiers that they decided to go with. They actually had a 2-tier system, so they kept it very simple. And remember that they're using the volume-based pricing model. The base package basically gives all the functionality of embedded analytics. So access to self-service chart and dashboard builders, and users can basically create anything they want, but they imposed limits on the volume of content that users can create. They then introduced a second tier, which they call the enterprise package, which aligned with customers in the larger bands. And it's the same amount of features, but there were no limits on the content being created. So there's only 2 tiers here. And then they decided that in the future, they might have add-ons for the enterprise package. And the add-ons might add features such as automated workflows and then AI capabilities. But largely, they were going to stick with a 2-tiered system, base and enterprise, just to keep it simple. So they wanted to leave us with some best practices that they'd observed. Number 1 was they always performed a win-loss analysis, not just when they lost to identify gaps, but also to better understand when and why they won. Also, in determining what components of volume to measure, they discovered that user-based volume was not a great way to determine pricing and models, basically because it puts a lot of pressure on their customers to determine exact usage needs, and then that leads to unpredictable pricing. So they decided it should be based more on data, and then more on the actual amount of content that you're adding into the platform. Virtually unlimited users. They also noticed that from their customers' perspective, their customers were looking for an all-in-one platform. So what that meant is that their customers are not looking for a platform to download the data and then push it into Excel or some other BI vendor. They expected that the analytics would be provided embedded within the core platform of their offering. So those are the three best practices that they wanted to leave us with. That was customer number one. The second customer decided to go with a value-based pricing model. And to start with, they decided that the value that embedded analytics brought to the market was really as a competitive differentiator, with basically a set of features and capabilities that their customers had never had access to before. They used the value-based pricing model to then charge for add-ons over and above that base analytics. And in terms of their pricing strategy, which would be next, they wanted to achieve about 2 to 5x the average price point, with the revenue appearing about a year after the initial investment. So if you measure all the sales that you have from your customers traditionally over a single quarter, then take the average. That was their average price point when they started their journey with Qrvey. And then a year later, they wanted to achieve at least 2x that, ideally 5x. So they also used a subscription tiered model, and they decided to use the 3-tiered system. Tier 1 is a set of interactive pre-built baseline dashboards with access to historical data. Interestingly, this tier was not optional. So if you sign up with their core platform, you basically get tier 1 of embedded analytics included. Next is tier 2. Tier 2, they decided, would give you access to more types of data. In other words, different data sets that you can analyze, as well as real-time data streams. So you get the historical data from tier 1, and you get the real-time data streams in tier 2. And next and final would be tier 3, which gives you full self-service analysis capabilities. So this means you get everything in tier 1 and tier 2, the pre-built dashboards, but now you can fully customize those pre-built dashboards and create new dashboards and new charts from scratch. But it's not a volume-based pricing model, so there's no limit on the amount of content that you can create. So this worked well with them, and they wanted to leave us with some best practices. Remember, I said that tier 1 is not an optional package. They made the bold decision to include embedded analytics in their core offering as mandatory. And they did it because they recognized that they were the market leaders in their space, and they really wanted to set more of a competitive differentiator. So they weren't afraid to increase the cost of their base or lowest tiered offering. They also recognized that of all the different types of offerings you can include and sell in the market, analytics is particularly valuable because the alternative to not having it in the platform that you're using is to hire perhaps a report developer or even a data scientist, and those are typically 6-figure jobs. So you wouldn't be saving much money to have that capability or expertise in-house. And then finally, you don't have to go it alone or even wonder what that step-up base pricing should be. You can absolutely use a beta deployment to some early adopters, maybe even work with a set of trusted partners who will be open and transparent about, what they would be willing to pay and where they see the value of that offering. So those are 2 case studies with 2 of our customers from Qrvey. And I'm going to turn it over to David now, just to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, Natan. I think really interesting to sort of step through the different strategies and tiers and pricing models that some of our customers have really been able to successfully put into practice to leverage the embedded analytics capabilities And this kind of speaks to, of course, what we've been looking at through the webinar today. Obviously, it starts with understanding what's possible to achieve with an embedded analytics set of tools inside of your SaaS application. We talked about some of those different approaches, whether it's building, POCs for demo purposes or launching basic sets of interactive data views, everything to custom dashboards or more of the robust self-service learning and subscription, or even as we saw with one of the other case study examples, their add-ons were going to include things like some of the AI and machine learning driven capabilities that they could launch out to their customers for analyzing and representing data within their solution. And so then it becomes time to, once you have the structure of your offering, how are you going to be able to then successfully monetize it? And we talked about, some of the different approaches, some of the different ways you could consider building that monetization. And of course, as we saw with, the case studies, very iterative, feedback-driven, sort of experimentation-driven type of approach, so that you can adapt successfully to what your customers are looking to do, and of course, generate the right amount of meaningful revenue for the best possible long-term growth of your embedded analytics solution as part of your overall SaaS product offering. So that's kind of a look at the big picture there with monetization. We have a bit of time here to answer some questions from the audience. So we're going to take a look and see, what are the questions that have come through, and we do have a couple here that we can touch on. So actually, the first question here kind of goes back to one of the early slides in the presentation around that path to ROI, and maybe I'll pass this over to Natan to answer. So someone's asking more specifics about those different phases. What is it? What are the timelines, or how long are you seeing it take to get to those different phases coming through as part of your analytics strategy?
Yeah, a broad answer would be that it's highly dependent on the requirements that you have, but I do see some patterns emerging. And your ability to get to production quickly with embedded analytics is extremely important. And it's one of the things that we're striving for here at Qrvey. Typically, that first phase, the targeted POC, that can almost certainly be done in 30 days or less, right? And it's really just a matter of getting a good comprehensive data set or two, and then building a couple good POC dashboards. And then depending on, how many baseline dashboards you want to offer, building those out and then doing the actual embedding into your core platform, I certainly see that doable within 90 days or less. And then depending again on how broad you want to offer self-service analytics, you might go to production with that just a month later. And if you have a more extensive set of requirements, certainly within 6 months, right? But it's really dependent at that point on really how much capabilities you want to offer. That's a good question.
Yeah, I thought I'd bring back up the slide that shows, what those phases were that we were just talking about. So, I think that's important to understand that, again, not necessarily an end-to-end timeline here where everything has to follow the other phase in sequence, but I think this is a good framework for reference, at least from certainly what we've seen among our different customers. So another question similar, I think, to the overall topic, and probably a little bit of what we saw with some of the case studies is, should the analytics license pay for itself, or I guess when you monetize, is that the goal for the monetization licensing of your analytics? Is the goal to always get it to pay for itself? And I think that's an interesting question as well. I mean, I think what we saw certainly with some of the case studies was they were looking to get a significant multiple ROI after a certain amount of time. I think in both cases, it was at least after the first year, if I'm not mistaken. So in those two instances, because they were taking those phased approaches and building out different modules, I think in their use cases, the goal was certainly to get the analytics to pay for itself through the monetization strategy. But if you think about some of the other topics that we were discussing when it came to things like those different strategies, obviously, if you're looking at something like a freemium model, then really you're not looking for it to pay for itself, but maybe it sort of fills the role of, like what we saw with one of those other case studies where they were offsetting the add-on cost of having to pay for a data scientist type role within their organization. So all of that is sort of built out as part of that freemium model, where you're offsetting costs of doing other things within the overall business. So I think that's important to understand. Depending on the type of strategy or model that you're using to monetize, it may or may not end up paying for itself, but you can always build out effective models for offsetting or leveraging those technologies as part of your overall offering. But it does give you obviously lots of opportunities for it to pay for itself and return a multiple ROI on your initial investment. And let's see, last question here. Can you talk a little bit more, maybe, Natan, about the add-on costs kind of model versus just increasing the total cost of the SaaS solution? I think this was part of some of the examples in the case study as well, where we looked at, obviously a difference between just kind of an add-on monetization cost versus building, just sort of upping the total cost of your core product.
Yeah, so I think the difference between the two models is well understood. You're either kind of increasing the base value or the base price of your offering, or it's kind of more of a buffet strategy of different add-ons. And it can be a bit daunting in this economy and in this environment to imagine yourself even considering raising the cost of even your base offering and charging more. But I really think that right now, most companies are not trying to be extra cheap. They're trying to be more or extra strategic. So they're going through their list of vendors, their list of contracts, and they're basically asking, what is nice to have? What is absolutely necessary that I have to offer my customers? And what was just nice to have? Unfortunately, as many of our customers discover, analytics is in that must-have category, right? And if you know that you're in that must-have category, you shouldn't really be afraid to even increase your price, even in this environment, right? Because I think organizations are being more strategic and trying to justify where their dollars are spent. If they know they can get an ROI and that target ROI that they want in the time frame that they want, they will be willing to pay for the investment to do that.
All right. Appreciate the responses and certainly the participation from everyone who attended today. I think to kind of wrap things up, this is where you can find more information about Qrvey. Visit us on our website. You can sign up for a demo. We'd love to show you a little bit more about what we can do in terms of providing you with that rich embedded analytics layer for your SaaS applications and products. And once again, thanks for your time today and for joining us on our webinar. Take care.